Okay, so this is part 0 of Elden Ring: The Ultimate Guide, and effectively, if you've clicked on this, you'll be curious as to what this is, and effectively this is just a sort of how to use this guide, what is this guide trying to accomplish, what does it cover. So yeah, if you're new to the game, hopefully this will kind of give you a little bit of a pointer on how to use the guide, just in case it's like you're a little bit confused on why we're doing certain things, and this will just kind of justify our choices a little bit more. So my lovely co-host is Twin Profanity, and he has helped do a lot of the planning and the recording and the voiceover for the guide, and he's been an incredible help. So he is going to take it away with the first point of how to use this guide.
Well, thank you very much. That was very kind. So the first thing we need to cover really is that the guide will grab every item in the game, with the exception of crafting items. Now, the reason for this is really one of brevity. So we know your time is valuable. Our time was valuable because we had to record the guide and get everything done. So crafting items, things that you can get an infinite number of, things that are not essential for game completion, not essential for trophy collecting, we avoided them. Unless it was something that we needed or planned on using, we missed it out. However, things like consumables, so the likes of throwing knives or poison darts, stuff like that, we grab those. We grab all the weapons that you can obtain without having to buy them. We grab all the spirit ashes that you can obtain without having to buy them, things like that. Yeah, we make a concerted effort to grab everything in the game.
So we also, of course, show you the inventories of stuff where there's the things that you can buy. We will also, get all the key items, all that kind of stuff. So this is a complete guide. And we'll also, when appropriate, mention the things that enemies drop. Now, again, for the sake of brevity, we're not going to show you all the drops. You can look up the drops, and we do encourage you to do so if you want to do that. But, that will be mentioned.
Which I guess leads us into point number 2, which is that the guide, as it exists, as it appears on YouTube, is meant to be viewed sequentially. So the parts are all numbered and named, and they're meant to be viewed in the order that they were released, and by extension the order that they're numbered in. So we'll be starting in Limgrave, from Limgrave we'll go to the Weeping Peninsula, from there into Stormvale, and so on and so forth. And the reason for this is largely to do with NPC quest progression. Plays a big part in it. So NPCs that appear in Limgrave will appear in later areas. So if you miss them in Limgrave, you won't have them in later areas. And this may be confusing if you view the guide out of order. So we may be in a later game area, we might be talking to an NPC that you don't have, which means you might have missed them in an earlier spot. So it's important to view the guide in the intended order, the order it was released in.
Yeah, because another thing to take into account is the fact that we can't retroactively explain everything about an NPC guide every time we encounter an NPC to kind of bring you up to speed. Not only that, if you are at an area and you don't have an NPC that we have, then you might have messed up a quest anyway. But again, for the sake of brevity, so it isn't a case of repeating ourselves over and over and over again, it is intended to be watched as one singular thing. But for each individual area, it will be a great guide. Just sometimes, if you're watching it out of order, you might not make all the NPC quests.
On the topic of keeping it brief, though, point number 3 is that the pacing for the guide is, in some parts, especially the first part, so I guess this serves as an apology for that, is lightning fast. We pick up everything in an area, we have to cover all of the content in that area in a time that is entertaining and digestible. So we will occasionally not talk about an item we pick up, and this is usually if the item isn't massively important. So as I'd said before, if we pick up something like arrows, we're probably not going to talk about it. If we pick up a weapon or a spirit ash, we're going to go into a bit more detail about that, because it's important to know how these things work so that you know what tools you have available to you if you're approaching the game in a slightly different way than we decided to.
As a result of this, though, the guide is meant to be quite a visual as well as an audio thing. So we do expect that you will be able to see what we are doing and copy it without us also narrating exactly what it is that we're doing.
So the fourth point we need to make is that we are showing you a way to approach the game. But if you feel like you want to try something else out, you want to try out some of the spells, you want to try out some new weapons, you want to try a boss weapon or two, you are encouraged to do so. Elden Ring is a big game, and it takes a long time to go through the whole thing. And I mean, I personally, and I'm sure you do as well, Tony, recognize that using the same strategy for the whole game can get a bit tedious.
Correct, yes.
So we're showing you an approach you can take, not necessarily the approach. It just so happens that the strategies that we're using tend to be simple and easy to understand, as well as easy to pull off, because the items you need to do the strategies that we use are pretty easily accessible at any point.
Yeah, correct. We don't do anything like over the top with the build or anything like that. The build is just supposed to be like, here is a solid build that a new player can easily get to grips with and very, very easily complete the game.
This leads us into point number 5, which was our choice of build. So, as you'll see when we're going through the game, we rely largely on status effect damage and Ashes of War and weapons that you can just pick up off the ground. You get them in specific locations. A lot of them you get early on. And this is, once again, reinforcing that idea of ease of access, where your approach to the game doesn't have to necessarily be dictated by the way that you start the game. You can vary it up as you go along, but the approach we've taken is easy to pull off from minute 1 of you starting your playthrough.
Yes. The build uses a lot, like a high amount of HP and a lot of things that can kind of just give a disproportionate amount of damage, considering the status investment that you put into the weapons and the damage output. So as a result, it should be something that anybody can get to grips with.
This is a perfect way to segue into point number 6, that is that the guide does not rely on farmed items in any capacity. So enemies have a particular pool of drops. We don't rely on anything that those enemies drop at any point.
Yes, theoretically an enemy could drop something that is better than what we're using, but that's kind of besides the point. Again, a lot of this guide is to do with not wasting your time. Let's get you through the game and just enjoying it without making the game a slog and being like, oh, farm these enemies for 2 hours until you get its full armor set. Nah, that's not how we're operating. You're just using what you can find easily out in the floor.
Yeah, we were really trying to mitigate the amount of chance involved in the guide process, and you'll see that reflected in a few ways. So not having to farm anything because all the drops are chance based, that's a big part of it. And another way is we tried to approach things like boss fights in such a way that the method for beating them is consistent. It works all the time, every time, without any RNG shenanigans ruining your day.
Generally, the boss strategies are more about, if you're using what we're using, this will make the boss very doable, as opposed to maybe the other guides that we've done where it's more like, specifically here is the boss's movements and attacks and you want to look out for this and that. Elden Ring doesn't quite work that way. The bosses are way bigger and flashier, and they're kind of harder to see where they're coming from, and their attacks are faster. So as a result, the way of tackling the boss is more build based rather than like specific technique based. However, there are a few bosses obviously where there is a specific technique to dealing with them, but for the most part it is build reliant.
Yeah, and if there is a specific technique, we do show you that. We recorded 2 runs through the game, and so we tried our best to show you the specific boss kill strategy whenever there was one available, as well as show you the generic, right, we're actually going to fight this like a man strategy, instead of using the scumbag strategy, which is sometimes fun, but it does take a lot of the challenge out of the game. So
yeah, again, a lot of how we've approached it is like, you're still going to be playing Elden Ring, but this is just like, if you're doing what we're doing, you're gonna have like an easier time, because again, we don't want to go completely out our way to the point where it's gonna ruin the game for you.
There's no real way to segue from that into point number 7.
That's
But
fine.
point number 7 is that we don't kill any NPCs. And this
Yes.
is in an effort to complete all of their quests, to show you how to do that in what we believe is the intended order. And granted, there are certain things you can obtain early by killing an NPC, or you can get something that would otherwise be unobtainable by killing an NPC. And while these things are something that's kind of important to talk about, and we do cover that as and when it pops up in the videos, but largely we will be avoiding killing NPCs because it's not in keeping with the theme of the guide. Yeah.
So yeah, essentially the theme of the guide, or the spirit of the guide, is like no killing NPCs, no farming for items, trying to be quick. Here is just like a nice, easy, beginner-friendly strategy, not something that's completely bullshit, overpowered, but something that's like solid and reliable is more what we're going for.
On the topic of not using bullshit, overpowered strategies, this leads nicely into point 8, which is that we seem to take the intended path of progression through the game. So, as I said before, the guide is sequential. It's meant to be viewed in order. And this is in large part to do with the difficulty curve of the areas. The way we approach it is each area will be suitably challenging when you get to it. Instead of doing what is an option you have available to you, which is, say, farming a group of enemies until you're massively overleveled for an area, destroying the difficulty curve, and also destroying the fun of playing the game.
Yeah, part of the guide is effectively balancing the amount of challenge that we'll end up presenting you, because we don't want to ruin the game either. We don't want to go completely at a late game area, get the best weapon, and then just completely melt everything for half the game, and then half the game just isn't even fun. No, this is exactly where you should be. So this is as good as you could be if you're taking the intended path through the game, and that is part of the spirit of the guide.
Yeah, that nicely leads us into point 9 as well, which is, despite what we're telling you and despite what we'll show you in the videos, not everything in the game is mandatory. So this also ties into we chose a build instead of the build for beating Elden Ring. If we go through an area, we go through a cave, we go through a catacomb, and you look at the items we get, you see the spirit ashes and the weapons that you can obtain and the boss that we fight, and you think, I don't really care about anything in there, feel free to skip it. You don't need to do every piece of content in the game. If it's an NPC quest and you're trying to hunt trophies, sure. We mention specifically when an item is important for a trophy. We mention if items can be missed that would otherwise get you a trophy. So if content is more essential for the complete experience, then we do cover that. But if it's not essential, feel free to just not do it.
Yeah. Elden Ring's a big game, and it can be a bit of a slog sometimes. So, I mean, by all means, if you want to experience the full thing, go ahead. But if something just doesn't look fun, that's totally fine.
Similarly to that as well, despite us showing you what we believe to be the intended path of progression through the game, Elden Ring's very open, especially the first half of Elden Ring is very open. You can cover a lot of the map without ever fighting anything.
Yes.
So if you decide you want to go to a late game area and get better gear and stronger spells and more health flasks and stronger health flasks, you feel free to do that.
Yeah.
There are things you can do that will make the early game way easier. So if you're really struggling, then you can check out some of the later parts of the guide that will give you the means to make the early game almost comically easy. And with that confidence boost, you can then follow the guide in the intended order after you've done the part that was giving you some trouble, to overall smooth out the experience you have with the game. That's something that was really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, as much as we don't want to ruin your fun by making it mandatory to go to like later areas and pick up overpowered stuff. If that's still something that you want to do, then by all means, go ahead and do it.
And on the topic, finally, of content being important for getting trophies, this guide will get you the platinum trophy if you follow it verbatim. So if you go to everywhere we go, you talk to everyone we talk to, you kill everything we kill, you will get the platinum trophy by the time you have seen the credits roll 4 times.
Yeah. And that pretty much covers Elden Ring: The Ultimate Guide. So, yeah, get to it.